Welcome to the Big Fat Gay Podcast, where we talk about things that are weighing on our minds. I am Trevor Keyson. I'm a super chub, and I'm also a little jelly bean that you found in the couch cushion from Easter. Is it from this Easter? Is it from last Easter? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you're going to eat it because we're at that point in quarantine where you really don't care what people think.
This is my quarantine life.
Are you a Birdie Bots bean?
I am a watermelon flavored Jelly Belly. Where I'm green on the outside, but pink on the inside.
That sounds about right. That tracks. And I am Michael. I am a chaser. And today I am a chocolate-covered frog. You'll find out why later, though.
Spoilers, Michael.
I am Don. I live in Hollywood. I am a chub. And I am the full-sized candy bar you're always hoping for at Halloween.
Oh, my.
Goodness gracious. I'm Dan Oliverio. I'm an author and public speaker, and I'm a chaser. And I'm a piece of hard candy.
Oh yeah.
My.
But what kind of hard candy?
How hard?
The kind that's like a cough drop, but you like it anyway.
Trevor, we had asked a question last week at the end of the episode, basically wondering if people, and I think Don had asked this, if people had noticed that it was fresh vegetables that went first, or like healthy foods that went first in grocery stores right when the pandemic hit, or if it was sort of the other way around. Because here in LA, it did seem to be mostly the healthy foods, but
That's
maybe
correct.
that wasn't the case.
So I received two responses to this question, one of which from my Trevor from another mother, my college roommate named Trevor, who Michael and I played D&D with.
Yeah.
And he said, to answer your question for Midwest listeners, the frozen pizzas were put under the same restrictions as toilet paper. They were selling out for freezing. Mac and cheese too. Fruits and vegetables definitely took a hit, but I was still able to get our usual supply without too much issue. The meat shortage is a big thing now. There's very little beef in stores around here now.
So I guess it does vary. Although I will say a friend of mine that I heard from responded and said that where he's from in the South, it was all of the healthy foods that went first. But he's from a slightly larger city. So I'm curious, like what's the difference there? Is it being in a city that makes a difference? Because Trevor's not in a particularly big city.
Another friend of the podcast replied to our post saying, to answer your question, what did your grocery store look like? I live in Tennessee, and the meat was gone. The chips and snack things were gone. Ramen, beans, and instant mashed potatoes were gone, but all the healthy stuff was still there. So while I wasn't able to get some meat, I was able to get vegan McChickens, LOL.
Oh, I have to issue a retraction. Apparently, so I made the bold claim that McChickens came with pickles, and you guys put me in my place about it, and I was insistent. Apparently, where I worked at McDonald's, people just ordered them with pickles every time. And of course, they don't come with them. I just thought that's how they were. I just assumed that's how they were supposed to be.
Wow.
It was just unthinkable that they come any other way. Yeah.
I couldn't imagine it. Yes.
They were just very upset at McDonald's for not being Chick-fil-A and just wanted that pickle action right now.
So I need to apologize personally to Lizzo for accusing her of not making a proper vegan McChicken without pickles.
This
Wow,
is
how
so
the
sweet.
pickle
I'm
turns.
so glad the three of us could be here for your first senior moment, Michael.
My first? How long have you known me? So in the spirit of that, we actually wanted to ask y'all listeners another question and see if we could get some interesting responses that we could talk about in a future episode. And this came up as a potential idea for a recurring bit that we might do. But Dan, did you want to, I think this is your wording here. Did you want to set up the question that we wanted to ask people?
Yeah. So we were talking about ways that people are in the pandemic right now. And so we wanted to know, is there an action you've taken or a conversation you've had with a friend or family member that's had a positive impact on how they relate to your being fat or your attraction to fat people? What worked, what didn't work? How has your relationship improved because of the action or conversation? And we'd just love to hear, because I'm sure other people would also like to know what worked for people or what didn't work.
Yeah. And I'm very curious. I think we'll save our own responses for when we get to that episode, but I think that could be a really fun way to have to introduce some positive discussions with our listeners. And I also want to add that I've heard from a few people, and I think maybe Dan and I have done a better job of this, or the four of us have, but I've heard from a few people that their experience of being fat really hasn't been all that bad, or like maybe haven't felt the same kinds of social pressures that we tend to talk about, because that is the ubiquitous experience, I think, for a lot of people. So trying to find a way to represent kind of both sides of people's experiences, because sometimes it isn't necessarily something that is like this negative impact in your life.
Well, and I wonder if that's because what they're doing something that does work, and so it actually never rises to the level of being horrible and oppressive.
Well, I'm also wondering if there's some effect on literally geography. Like if you're fat in LA,
definitely.
you get treated very differently than if you're fat in Peoria, you know?
Yeah. So maybe include your location or anything you think is relevant with your answer, because it would be really fun to kind of explore that with actual, anecdotes from listeners.
Maybe we can make like a map on Google Maps and pin people's responses so we can see like a fat map.
A fat map. I like that idea, actually. I would like to see that. Let's make it happen.
I guess kind of related to this idea of family and fat and the podcast. So back in episode 2, I was kind of, I said, my mom hadn't listened to the podcast. I didn't know if she knew it existed, because there had been, when we released the podcast, there was like kind of a family fight going on. And I was like, I don't really want to possibly activate anything by being like, hey, I'm doing a podcast about fat and sex. So sometime at the end of last week, my mom followed the podcast on Instagram and then sent me a message being like, oh my God, this is so exciting. Why didn't you say anything? I can't wait to listen. How do I listen on Instagram? So then I had to explain to her, like, okay, no, like I sent her a picture of the Apple Podcasts like app and was describing to her how to listen. But I also was like, okay, but like, so we talk about, sex sometimes, and like, I don't really know if that's your thing.
I should interject here that this is also the woman who didn't like Sex in the City, because who would talk to their friends about sex?
I think we talk about that in episode 2. But so then 2 days later, she was like, after much consideration, I've decided I'm not going to listen to the podcast, but I love and support you and everything you do, and I don't want you to feel constrained or you can't say anything, which, I mean, for those of you who have gotten this far in the podcast, obviously that's not the case. But
it was really lovely, though.
Yeah, it's natural to have curiosity. When we posted the Valentine's Day episodes, I forget the disclaimer I put on it on Facebook, but it was basically like, moms, this may be the one you want to skip. At which point the first response was from my stepmother going like, oh, well, this is the one I have to listen to.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Valentine's Day one, I was surprised at the number of people that listened to both all the way through.
All the way, yep.
I don't know if I said this, my Pilates instructor who listens, after he got to that point, he's like, I learned a lot of new things about your body from that, but I have a better understanding of your body now and how it moves.
That's kind of fantastic, though.
Yeah,
I agree.
I mean, that he listened, and hey, this is our follow-up. He actually finished the episode. Like the last we heard, he kept falling asleep around the chocolate heart box bit.
Yes. No, he started falling asleep now around when us describing the cruise ship and dreaming he was on the cruise ship. But I guess speaking of listening to things as you fall asleep,
yes,
I noticed the other day that on Spotify, Daniel Radcliffe, I feel like I don't need to say this, but Daniel Radcliffe from Harry Potter.
Oh, that Daniel Radcliffe. Oh, okay.
Of Harry Potter fame.
Because, we've got a neighbor.
Is reading the Harry Potter books chapter by chapter, which Don was saying that this is the first time he's read the books.
No, that was sorry.
Okay.
I believed you. I believed you.
You said it with such like.
So you can listen to him read them on Spotify.
Yes. I think maybe other streaming platforms, but I use Spotify for everything. So
I wonder if our audience has figured out why we're talking so much about Harry Potter and Daniel Radcliffe at this point.
Well,
Because this is a Harry Potter podcast now, everyone.
now
That's
everybody, Harry Potter fan cast.
This is our big fast Potter podcast.
Yes.
Yes, well said, Don. Well said.
Big fat gay Potter.
Yes.
There you go.
Nice. That's okay. So today we had a really fun topic that Trevor actually came up with about sort of children's literature and how fat is handled in it, and specifically fat phobia. Did you want to sort of set us up with that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I kind of came back to this from seeing Harry Potter in my Spotify thing. This is I'm very passionate about children's literature and fat because I love children's literature. And I wrote a middle grade book with a fat character specifically to kind of address this gap of any kind of fat positivity within children's literature, young adult literature, which is think junior high and above, has started to address this. I've mentioned Julie Murphy in the past, who wrote Dumplin' and Puddin' and Ramona Blue and, several other wonderful books. But middle grade literature still is in this place of whenever a character is fat, it is usually to show that they are flawed in some way, either just being greedy or stupid or just gluttonous. And the fatter they are, the more terrible they are. And Harry Potter is one of these books where I think that is very prominent.
Yeah, repeatedly too.
Yes. And specifically, I think, Harry Potter's family, the Dursleys, Vernon and Dudley, they're fat and terrible and cruel. And Dudley, as kind of Harry Potter's growing up, Dudley gets fatter and more cruel.
Yeah.
His fatness is in proportion to how cruel he is.
Yeah. So that second thing is a lot of times in kids' books, fatness is also equated with being a bully.
Yes.
Yeah, it's almost like there's two choices. The fat character is either the victim or the bully. Or if you remember that TV show, what was the one that was canceled where she's both? She gets her jaw wired shut and then she turns from being the victim into the bully.
Yeah.
That would be it. So, but yeah, a number of commentators in the fatosphere have made that observation that fat characters in children's lit tend to be either bullies or victims.
Just while we're at the top of the segment, we referenced several articles. I've kind of noticed, because someone pointed it out to me, that we have stopped saying the authors when we reference articles. So I'm going to just list off our sources quickly because they're fantastic reads.
Sorry, before you get to that, I think the reason sometimes we forget to do that is because we do our due diligence on the website where we list all of our resources. But yes, we'll try and be in the podcast. We'll try and be better about that.
Yes. So just quickly at the top of the segment, I'll list off the articles we reference. From Slate, we have The Wonderful, Terrible Power of Food and Roald Dahl by Annalisa Quinn. We have The Ideology of Fatness in Children's Stories by Lindley Stace. Pigtails to Fat Ladies, Fat Phobia in the Harry Potter Universe by Lady Saika. And from CBC Diversity 101, Who's That Fat Kid? Fat Politics in Children's Literature by Rebecca Rabinowitz. So clap, clap, clap. Thank you all for writing these
really
lovely
wonderful articles each.
Oh, and I mean, Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling.
So I found a list of anti-fat tropes in children's books that I thought might be a good place to lead off from. So these are the problems that you see across children's literature, sort of summed up into a quick list. And they broke it down to 4 of them. One is, so many books center on skinny characters learning to treat fat people with respect, only have it after they've earned it by going above and beyond to prove their humanity. So basically, these fat characters have to do something truly and deeply exceptional to prove they get to be treated as an equal to everyone else, right?
Yep, I've seen that so many times.
Second trope, so many books offer the only path to humanity and acceptance through diet and exercise, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Naturally.
3, so many books end with the parents beaming at their successfully downsized child, who is now worthy of love and affection because they've starved themselves thin. 4th trope. So many books with fat, happy, confident characters who are depicted as pigs, elephants, and cows, surrounded by smaller animals who make fun of them. If that seems to be the symbol, a lot of children literature anthropomorphize animals, right? And overweight characters are almost always dinosaurs, cows, and elephants.
Pigs.
And hippos. And pigs. So this is sort of the baseline that we have to work from in children's literature. That's what we see.
What's interesting for me is that I think starting with Harry Potter, because it's sort of how we led into this. Trevor was mentioning the Dursleys, and there are a lot of other characters in that world.
Crabbe and Goyle, the two primary physical bullies through the entire thing.
Crabbe and Goyle, and the pink lady. I'm forgetting her name. Umbridge.
Dolores Umbridge.
Dolores Umbridge
also describes, in very specific fat terms. So J.K. Rowling, I think it's hard to argue that she doesn't largely characterize fat people in many negative ways. Like, that's pretty much the only way they show up in her stories.
Well, it's worth pointing out that there are actually positive fat characters in there, but their fatness is completely downplayed to the point where, like, you might miss it.
Like who?
So Professor Sprout is pleasingly plump in there.
Yes, and Molly Weasley.
Molly Weasley, again, it's like the matronly plumpness,
yes,
which is okay.
But that's just code for acceptably fat.
Right.
Like you're not out of
Right.
bounds yet.
Right.
Well, but it's through their perceptions of the kids.
And
so it's like,
I think,
yes,
and part of the way that it influences the reader is that when she writes, she is constantly reminding the reader of how fat somebody is when they are a terrible person.
Yes.
Also, particularly with the Dursleys.
I found this really interesting. So there is a famous quote by J.K. Rowling.
it's a longer quote from an interview with her, but this is the quote you usually see like floating around Tumblr. I mean, is fat really the worst thing a human can be? Is fat worse than vindictive, jealous, shallow, vain, boring, or cruel? Not to me.
So she follows this quote up, and this is sort of the rest of it from the interview. She tells a story. When she went to the British Book Awards, after the ceremony, she bumped into a woman she hadn't seen for nearly 3 years. And the first thing the woman said to her was, "You've lost weight since the last time I saw you." And her reaction was, well, the last time you saw me, I just had a baby. But then also what she felt like saying was, I produced my 3rd child and my 6th novel since the last time I saw you. Aren't either of those things more important, more interesting than my size? But no, my waist looks smaller. Forget the kid in the book. Finally, something to celebrate.
Yeah. And so here's the point I wanted to make. How do you reconcile that with what you've just pointed out before, whereas all these basically fat equals bad in so many characters? And then Don pointed out some of these exceptions. I think what's might be operating here, and a lot of people in the fatosphere have said, they're like, Rowling, you need to look at your own inner prejudices. But I think what it is this. When it comes to the fat equals bad, almost all of those characters are male. You see it with Dudley and Vernon, his father. You see a different sort of fat equals stupid in Fantastic Beasts.
Right.
But when it comes, the only female fat character who's really evil comes in with the aunt and the Dolores Umbridge.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I will point out that in the case of Aunt Marge, it's also emphasized, she's fat, but also she's mannish. She has they describe her mustache and, it's not as thick as Uncle Vernon's, but, it's very noticeable.
Right. So the scene we're talking about, for anyone who isn't familiar, is that early on in the Harry Potter series, the Vernon's sister comes to visit them, and she is exceedingly cruel, especially to Harry. And he finally retorts by using magic accidentally to sort of inflate her to an enormous size, and she sort of floats up into the sky. And as Trevor was saying, she's described as looking almost exactly like Vernon, down to the mustache, and behaving even crueler than he was. So Dan, walk me through your point you were making, because I didn't quite grasp the difference you're drawing between the way that male and female is represented in J.K. Rowling's writing.
That the idea, I think where J.K. Rowling gets offended is when it has to do with fat women. And that if you make the association of fat equals bad with men, that sort of passes. That's sort of okay.
Interesting.
Something that I've seen that is almost makes Harry Potter, those books treat fat people kindly, is when you look at the works of Roald Dahl. And people have been talking about this too in various articles that we mentioned, where it's, and even in
Roald Dahl, who is famous
personal,
for writing Charlie and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the Glass Elevator,
James and the Giant Peach,
James and the Giant Peach,
The Witches.
Yeah. So many of which have been made into movies. And there is, even in Roald Dahl's personal writings, there is such an association of trauma with food, and food being the cause of evil and transformation. And it's his own relationship with food. And, he actually writes about this. I think there's a quote of him telling his future wife that I'd rather be dead than fat.
Oh,
yes.
Oh boy.
And you can see that completely in his work.
I remember being so upset watching Charlie and the Chocolate Factory when I was a kid. The way, so Augustus Gloop, for those of you who have not seen the movie or not read the book, all of these children brought into the Chocolate Factory are presented as having a fatal flaw. Sadly, very literally in this sense. One of them, their flaw is they watch too much television. One of them is a spoiled brat who wants everything right now, their way. And Augustus Gloop is a character whose flaw is that he's fat.
Right.
Pretty much it.
Well, because gluttony and fat are conflated for him.
The only negative thing the only actual bad thing he does, he doesn't obey his mother to get away from the chocolate river, and he falls in and he gets vacuumed up into a tube where we can only assume he dies horribly.
Right. So the other kids genuinely display a lot of really awful sort of brattish traits, whether it's selfishness or laziness or whatever. And in his case, the only thing that he does wrong is that he gets excited about a chocolate river and wants to go drink the chocolate and falls in.
And that's Dahl's point. I mean, that I would think that the author would say, yes, that is just as bad as the other things.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. So at the end of the book, spoilers once again for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, we see the children and their parents leaving the factory, and they have survived, but they're all kind of brutally maimed in some way. But I don't remember if Augustus Gloop is or not. I think he might have been stretched out.
Didn't he get stretched thin?
Because he gets sucked up the tube, and then we find out the tube stretched him out, so he's not fat anymore. He's just kind of like a tube-shaped child.
Right.
So again, it's a fat character that exists purely to get his body is a moral judgment. And he is bad because his body exists.
Yes.
Yeah, he is the sin.
Yeah.
As is the case with fat phobia. He is the sin.
Yeah.
Another famous example of this is in The Witches, the character of Bruno Jenkins, who is basically he's a fat kid who can't stop eating and ends up getting turned into a mouse because the witches see he can't stop eating and they trick him into eating this chocolate that's been tainted with a potion that turns children into mice.
And by the way, their whole plan to take over and to stamp out children and to turn them all into mice is to implant this magic potion in chocolate shops so that children's own lust and gluttony will get them.
That is interesting. I completely forgot that point. Oh, that's very interesting.
I feel like that comes back several times in Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl's right.
I mean,
yes.
The book Boy, it's a biography of Roald Dahl, and you get everything about his writing becomes crystal clear. You see his issues with food. You see his issues with women. I mean, you kind of get fatness just from all of that.
He's had a fascinating life, but certainly a lot of those traumas are reflected heavily in his writing.
I would point out that this idea that I'd rather be dead than fat, I mean, we have a whole society full of people who believe exactly that. I remember one time I was in a Starbucks and I'm striking up a conversation with someone and they were going to pick me up, sexually. And I said, well, you're not my type. Well, what's your type? So I showed them my type and they're like, oh my God, if I looked like that, I would shoot myself.
Right.
And I asked him, and I said, well, why? And of course, he fell back on what I call fat fundamentalism. Oh, because it's so unhealthy. I said, so let me get this straight. Being fat is so unhealthy that you would shoot yourself? Is that your logic? Is that what you're saying? And it was actually, it was interesting because it led into a whole conversation of course, his fear of being fat.
Right.
That was literally the worst thing that could happen to him. And I promise you, this is not isolated. There are so many people who walk around in that mentality.
And what Dan just talked about is one of the reasons why the subject of fat phobia in children's literature is actually important, because the programming for this attitude comes from this period of childhood in the literature.
Absolutely.
One of these, I think one of the articles that Trevor already mentioned, it might be one of the other ones I read, talks about how children at the age of 3 to 5 have already been programmed to recognize that fat is a bad thing. It's a negative thing. And they would prefer to be crippled or maimed in some way than to be fat at age 5. Right. So these stories matter. And there's a couple good books out there but they're so rare at this point that to find those few good books with kind portrayals of fat people, you have to go through just this minefield of terrible representation. I actually thought I found a good trope for fat characters, and then I found a scholarly article that I will also share that proved me wrong. This is less so in books, probably more in just broader children's entertainment. But the fairy godmother is generally portrayed as being a larger, matronly woman with good intentions and magical powers that will save the day. The most famous of them being Cinderella's godmother from the Disney movies. What's been pointed out by this article, though, is there are multiple portrayals of the fairy godmother across multiple forms of media. In every form where she's portrayed by a larger woman, not only is she these positive qualities I've mentioned, she's always disorganized, scatterbrained, kind of ineffectual, right?
Yeah.
However,
and sort of oblivious to the consequences of what she's doing.
Right. And what this scholar called it was the fat fairy syndrome, right? Where she has these wonderful powers, but she's not really efficacious. Or if she is, it's sort of by accident or at the last minute, as opposed to the fit fairy portrayals. In all of these versions of Cinderella, where you have a young, slim fairy godmother, then she's portrayed more like a Glinda of the Good Witch of Oz, where she's ethereal and wonderful and smart and perfect and not scatterbrained at all. So the positive portrayal of this fat person needs to be pulled back and tempered by another flaw that it's a little frustrating, even though it's still a good character. Yeah. It has to be flawed that way.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that kind of leads into what I started taking away when I was reading these articles. If you're going to include a lot of, evil or mean fat characters in Harry Potter, having fat characters on the good side, which she does have a few, to balance it out, and not just some side character whose class they go to that's mentioned once each book, but like actual fat heroes to represent, both sides of, the character, the protagonist and the antagonist, that people can look up to.
I think this might be an interesting test, because I agree with what you're saying, Michael, but like what's another way to translate that into an action that an author could take? And I think it might be this. Is there a fat character in your story that people would want to be? Like, of course people want to be Harry Potter, and of course people want to be Hermione, and people might even want to be Dumbledore. But, and you could say, well, and of course you could say that, well, Hermione and Harry are this sort of, straight white ideal, Dumbledore's aged. We can talk about racial diversity in Harry Potter another day. Yeah. But I don't think anybody wants to be Neville.
No.
Who in the films was portrayed as fat. And I don't think anybody wants to be Vernon Dursley. And I don't think and if we go to Fantastic Beasts, where there's an almost positive portrayal of a fat guy, I think the fat actor is adorable. He's really handsome. Yeah. I don't think anybody wants to be Jacob Kowalski. No. Even though he seems to get the hot blonde woman. No, he doesn't. And she plays him. And as the films go on, she increasingly plays him. Right. Because he's, of course, fat and ineffectual. Oh, and yes, as one of our authors in our articles points out, oh, of course he's a baker. Oh, but he's an unemployed baker, so he works in a canning factory. Right. It's got to be food related. So the test I'm putting forward is, have you written a fat character that somebody would want to be? It's worth circling back to Neville too, because at first glance, Neville is a great character arc. He's actually the guy who saves the day ultimately. But he's another example of the character that is ineffectual, unliked and unloved until even in the books, he loses the weight. He returns from one of the breaks having slimmed down, and suddenly he seems to be more of a power in the books than he was before.
So I had forgotten that. My recall for things like book details is pretty terrible, but I remembered that the actor, just as he grew up, lost weight and, grew into himself and became
ridiculously hot.
Right.
Well, and he worked out. He worked out a lot. I mean, he didn't just sort of accidentally lose weight.
Sure. But I had forgotten. So, Don, you're saying that was written into the books too?
It was something in the books, but like most of the good characters don't receive a lot of attention to their physical characteristics, and definitely you don't get reminded of those physical characteristics very often. Molly Weasley, I think it's described once somewhere.
Yeah, I think just when you first meet her, she's described as a plump woman.
Yeah, so never again are you reminded of that character feature.
That is what I would say is how it should be, but for all characters, good and evil. Like, if you want somebody to be a fat character, by all means, describe them as fat, but then move on from that point, because that is not the defining feature of that person leading to all of their moral decisions.
And if character descriptions aren't repeated, readers tend to put their own descriptions into their place. And especially if that reminder never comes up. So, for example, this is not a weight-related issue, but when The Hunger Games came out, there's a young female character in there that they cast a black girl to play. And the fan base just went insane because how dare they play? She's clearly a white girl. But if you go back and read the book, she is described as being darker skinned, but only once. And most of those readers forgot or ignored that and put their own description on there of what they wanted her to look like.
Right.
So you're seeing that with the heavier positive characters. Because we have so many people have that existing stereotype, they're imposing their own views on the character.
Let's take the Hunger Games again. I mean, Peeta is supposed to be a fat kid. And in the movies, at least, he's maybe you could argue that the actor whose name I'm forgetting is kind of
Josh Hutcherson.
Josh Hutcherson, maybe Hutcherson. You could.
I don't. He's not. No, you could argue. No. You could argue he has a. No,
he's
the
not.
best you can say is he has a roundish face. That's as far as you can get with that.
Baby face, maybe, but definitely not fat. So weirdly, that's an example of them going the opposite direction in the exact same property, where they took what maybe you could say they just stayed faithful to the books by casting a black actress. But at the same time, they also cast a quote unquote traditionally handsome boy to play a character who's supposed to be fat.
Can you imagine the uproar if she were trying to decide between the traditionally hot guy and the chubby blonde kid with a heart of gold and a sack of flour? I mean, oh my God, there would be no credibility in the movie in this culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there seems to be...
It would be a parody of itself.
The YA books in general, like the ones that were adapted for the screen, Divergent, Hunger Games, all of that stuff, I'm hard-pressed to think of an overweight character in any of them.
It's interesting because the way... I haven't read the Hunger Games, full disclosure, but from everything that I've heard described to me about Peeta's character, he is shown to be ineffectual in a lot of ways, but he does come up with an ingenious way to survive the Hunger Games based on actual skills and talents that he's worked on. Basically, it's a little silly, but basically he works in a bakery, shock and surprise, and he decorates cakes. Trevor, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the skill that he uses to camouflage himself when he's stuck in the Hunger Games. And that is how he survives. So I don't know, like, is that a positive portrayal of a fat character ingeniously coming up with a way to get through a situation? I don't know.
It would be if he were fat.
In the books, he is. In the books, he is
yes,
a fat
I'll be
character.
honest, I didn't even know he was supposed to be fat until you said that just now. I had no idea.
I did not know that.
All right. Well, let me double check. Let me check my resources then. Maybe I'm wrong.
That's my point. No, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that everybody has bent over backwards to make sure he is not seen as fat because he's too positive. He can't be fat.
So this is from Goodreads. He is described as being medium height with a stocky build and has ashy blonde hair that falls in waves over his forehead.
Stocky.
Sort
of fat light.
He is the town baker's son and is talented with baking breads, cakes, and icing cakes, which proves to be an unexpected boon in the arena.
Right.
Yeah, there's nothing there about fat. And I don't accept that stocky is just being a code word there for fat. I think stocky is there as he's not skinny.
Beautiful and handsome.
Well, I don't know, because if stocky is sort of the male equivalent of the pleasingly plump applied to the women in Harry Potter, right? Like,
or I think even like
maybe
curvy.
it's a dismissive term of the good fat person. It's dismissing the fat.
I can see in the case of a YA book, it's, like he's kind of fat, but like in a way that's okay, and he's still cute.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like lineman-ish. Like he's got a little belly, but not too much. And he's got those big hands for kneading bread that maybe he's going to squeeze your boob or something. I don't know what teenage girls want.
Good try, Trevor. Good try.
Is that what teenage girls want when they read Hunger Games? Are they thinking about
probably not
touching their boobs?
I mean, read the fan fiction. You'll find out for yourself. So Kate Hagen in her article, Trevor, what? Sorry,
I'm just thinking of like he kneaded my boob like it was a bun he was baking.
Yes, keep going.
No. No.
As he kneaded the flesh, it began to rise, as every good baker would expect.
Oh, boy. Okay, I take it back. Stop.
No, that's what the podcast is now.
In Kate Hagen's article, The Ideology of Fatness in Children's Stories, she starts it off by mentioning a small handful of fat female characters depicted accurately that she has enjoyed. Hairspray, My Mad Fat Diary, You're the Worst, and of course, Shrill. And I was curious, do we have, certainly we've come up with our own movies over the last couple months in the podcast, but do we have other books with fat characters that are positive that we could point to?
Well, so my tip, just the tip for the week is, so I have two examples I can vouch for. I think I previously mentioned Dear Sweet Pea by Julie Murphy, which is a middle grade book with a fat little girl who is kind of intercepting letters to the Dear Abby of her town's paper and like writing advice for people. And then the only example I know of for middle grade fiction with a fat, I say fat positive, like a positive portrayal of a fat character who is male, is All of Me by Chris Barron. And it's the main character, Ari, is kind of dealing with his parents' divorce. He's moved across the country and he's dealing with body image issues. So it's positive, but it is kind of like a heavier subject. I think there is a huge dearth of fiction for children with fat characters where it is just like the world's bigger, there's more happening, it's more fantastical.
I have a third one to add to that list.
Ooh, you do?
Well, I don't know. Maybe I should ask your permission first, Trevor.
I mean, you can.
Oh.
Trevor mentioned at the beginning of the show his book, which is the beginning of a series called Trevor and Hogarth, which is about a young boy who solves mysteries with his bulldog, and it is a delightful read. I read an earlier draft
it's
of
wonderful.
it. He has
it's really wonderful.
Worked on it since then, but I think the listeners should start a petition for Trevor to self-publish his book, and then we can get it out to the world, because this is an area that needs more positive influences, and I think you could be a leader in that world.
I'll link to, I kind of talk more about the process of the book and trying to get it published in AUX Populi, hosted by my roommate from college, Andy King. And I spoke with him kind of about all sorts of things, but including writing and my book and that whole journey. Mm-hmm. But it was interesting as kind of I was going through this process of, I wrote the book, I was submitting it to agents because you need an agent to get a publisher to publish it. And all sorts of feedback, which I was expecting, like there were going to be people that are like, oh no, this is, fat. I don't want to do this. But it was almost entirely positive feedback to like, oh my God, we need more fat characters in children's literature. The only negative feedback I received was from a fat woman, which I was so shocked by. And it was an agent I spoke to over the phone. And this was part of something else. She was not interested in the book, and she made that very clear. and it was a horrible experience. But like, why is he fat? Like, I don't. Why are you describing him as fat? And like, why would you say fat? I'm like, well, like, I'm fat, so I think it is the most accurate description. Like, I didn't want it to be like too like he's fat. It's fine. I was just like, I mean, I was stammering like I am now because I was like, I don't even know why this is like such an issue with you, because I want to be like, you're fat. Like this, I thought this would be okay.
There was a lot of internalized fat phobia there. Like she just objected to the entire treatment of the subject. Like, how dare you talk about fat and even use the word?
And everything about the book, it was that was a terrible experience.
Wow. In fact, I think that's probably her motivation to talk to you, was to express her offense.
So it is currently shelved. If there's any literary agents listen to this podcast and you've gotten this far, and get at me, maybe I'll release the first chapter with this episode.
I think that is a great idea.
I love that.
I think you should absolutely do that.
And I can assure you, if speaking from the completely unbiased opinion of being your husband, it is a delightful book that absolutely deserves to be out there.
Yes. I wholeheartedly agree.
We will also release a list of body positive books that I found from a website called booksforlittles.com. They have a subsection called Fat Liberation. List of a couple books there that are good for kids of 3 to 7, looks like around there. Including one that I read the description last night and I was like, I need to bring this book up because it sounds amazing. I would totally read this to any child. The Adventures of Isabel isn't for everyone. It's subversive and violent. Normally I avoid violence in books, but Isabel is so smooth and boss as she decapitates giants and dodges shills for big pharma. Isabel didn't scream or scurry. She washed her hands and straightened her hair up. Then Isabel quietly ate the bear up.
I love it.
Now, how can you read that description and not want to read it? Now, there is a note under this that I missed last night. Apparently, this book has been reprinted with slim characters.
What?
Boo.
So if you want the kind of awesome big girl version of this, you're going to need to go find the original printing. But the little illustration that I'm seeing from here, and it's ages 5 and up, and warning for violence. The book looks amazing, and I'm very disappointed to hear they did that. Also, a YA series that I would recommend. It's not specifically directed at young adults, but it's very appropriate for young adults. Anyone who knows me or has listened to me on anything before knows I am a Terry Pratchett fanatic. Mm-hmm. I love him. And his portrayals of larger women in his books are almost completely unique in that they are extremely well developed with deep psychologies and very understandable. So one that I want to bring up is his book Masquerade, featuring Agnes Nitt, who is unapologetically an extremely large woman who the witches in her hometown decide she needs to be a witch because the witches have a maiden mother crone thing going on, and their maiden has gotten laid and gone off to become a mother. So they need a new maiden, and they think that the fat girl is most likely to stay a maiden a long time. So she says, fuck this, packs up, goes to the city, joins the opera, where she gets sucked into a parody of the Phantom of the Opera, where she is the real talent behind Christine, who everyone thinks is a genius because she's pretty. But Agnes Nitt is the one who just sees what's actually going on. And it is a great telling of a real fat character with interesting psychology behind her. So
nice.
Very worth it.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And yes, I do have a bit.
Do you can we see your bit?
Today, our bit is called Fat Fairies.
Oh.
All of our questions are based around fat fairies or other magical people.
Enchanting.
Going with our tradition, I've got 4 different categories. Each of you will get your own, and then we get to do one for all 3 of you.
Okay.
So the categories, Trevor, why don't you lead us off this time? We've got Bibbidi Bobbidi Hey Boo. Check the folds.
I like it already.
Boss Fairy or Simply Divine.
Nice.
I'm going to go for Simply Divine.
Simply Divine. Pat Carroll, the absolutely iconic voice of Ursula the Sea Witch in The Little Mermaid, was not Disney's first choice. They actually originally went out to 1. B. Arthur, whose agent advised her that playing a sea witch was a no-win situation for her. Jean Stapleton, who played Archie Bunker's wife in All of the Family. She turned down the role because she was scheduled to play a witch in a completing movie. 3. Legendary stage actress Elaine Stritch, who turned down the role because she could not accept the morality clause in the Disney contract.
That sounds like her.
Or 4. Liza Minnelli, who accidentally missed out on the role due to a prolonged stint in rehab.
I think I know this one.
I believe it's Jean Stapleton.
Okay. Michael, you think you know?
I'm afraid to say no. I think it's Elaine Stritch, but
okay,
you keep going.
The correct answer, Dan, do you want to throw your hat in the ring on this one?
I think I'm going to go for Liza Minnelli.
The correct answer is B. Arthur, who no one
Oh my God.
Really?
We all suck.
It's actually not known if she personally ever heard about the offer, but basically her agent advised that playing a sea witch was just not a good look for her at that time period.
Dang it. And it was called Divine because the character Ursula was modeled to look like Divine.
Look like the drag queen Divine from the John Waters movies. That's correct. Dan, do you want to go up next?
Sure.
Okay, we've got Bibbidi Bobbidi Hey Boo, Boss Fairy, or Check the Folds.
Do you really need to ask, Don? Check the face.
All right. Merryweather, the blue fairy from Sleeping Beauty, is not only delightfully plump, but is also tied to an interesting Easter egg in the movie. 1, she makes the first accidental blue joke to appear in a Disney film in a very subtle line about the prince's tights. 2, she eats cookies shaped like Mickey Mouse's head in what's known as a hidden Mickey moment to Disney fans. 3, at one point, sharp-eyed viewers can see she is wearing Cinderella's glass slippers under her poofy floor-length skirts. Or 4, an early version of her appeared in the movie Fantasia, making her the first Disney character to appear in multiple Disney feature-length films.
A contract player.
That's a Hollywood joke.
Gosh, this is tough. They're all so supportable.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have broken Dan.
Well, it's the folds. I'm distracted.
What's your gut say?
I'm going to go with the Mickey, hidden Mickeys of the cookies.
Okay. The correct answer is the Mickey cookies. That is correct.
Oh, yay!
She can be seen chomping down on some Mickey head shaped cookies during the course of the movie. Let's see.
What inspired the title? The folds?
Basically, it's an Easter egg. So when you're searching for something, you've got to hide it. So
Yes, you are.
I'm reaching a little bit, but I had a feeling that's what we call Dan bait in the biz.
Yum. I like the bait.
Michael, we've got Bibbidi Bobbidi Hey Boo, and we've got Boss Fairy.
I will take Boss Fairy for all points.
Okay. In Tinkerbell's expanded universe, Rubenesque Fairy Mary is one of her mentors. What surprising secret ability does she reveal in Tinkerbell Secret of the Wings? 1, when her wings...
I'm sorry, that should just be an open-ended question.
1, when her wings are injured, she uses her fairy dust to climb beanstalks in an athletic and vigorous way that some outraged parents have compared to pole dancing. 2, she is an incredible ice skater, able to do incredible athletic feats and uses her body weight to seismically shatter ice in an interesting and artistic way. 3, aerial sumo wrestling. She manages to block a number of dangerous peach pit projectiles by punching them with her pretty paunchy posterior. Or she's the lead singer in a metal band.
Oh, I really want that to be the one. Damn it. All right. I think the answer is probably, I don't know. I think maybe the first one, the pole dancing one.
Pole dancing on beanstalks?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I really want it to be her singing in a metal band.
Well, singing in a metal band is the new Trolls movie. In fact, Fairy Mary is known for her ice skating.
Dang it.
I actually just watched you can see the video clip of this on YouTube. I checked it out last night, and at first I was thinking like, oh, this is great. Like they have her doing this like Olympic level skating stuff and it's fun. And then she flies up in the air. She comes crashing down and the ice shatters. I'm like, oh, great. It's a fat joke. And then it's not. Like she uses her weight appropriately to crack the ice and splash the water up around her to make this amazing sort of ice sculpture around her so she can make a final pose. Lovely. It was surprising and cute.
And that's from what now? The Adventures of Tinkerbell?
That is Tinkerbell Secret of the Wings.
Okay.
Keep up, Michael. It's part of the expanded Tinkerbell universe.
All right. We have an all play with Bibbidi Bobbidi Hey Boo. I've installed buzzers in front of all of you. You can buzz in if you believe you have the answer. Disney's Cinderella's fairy godmother, famous for singing Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, was physically based on what real-life woman? 1. Doris Day. Original versions had her being slightly more voluptuous and sassy, but Disney had them pull back the sexuality of the character. 2. Ginger Rogers. The original script had a magical transformation number that was supposed to have extensive choreography, which was later cut. 3. Eleanor Roosevelt. She was originally intended to be a little bit more curmudgeonly and smart, but Disney turned the character into a more scatterbrained direction. Or 4. No celebrity at all. She was the lead animator's idealized picture of what his young and svelte wife would look like when she got older.
Huh.
I have an answer. Bzzzt.
Dan is our first to buzz in. Dan, what do you think it is?
I'm going with the Doris Day angle.
Doris Day?
Doris
Little
Day.
Honk, honk. That's what my buzzer sounds like. I'm honking
okay,
in.
Trevor.
I'm going to also say Doris Day.
Okay. We got 2 for Doris Day. Michael, are you the
My
rebel?
buzzer is broken.
Of course it is.
Quick, someone help Michael press his buzzer.
Trevor's buzzing his buzzer for me.
Yeah.
I think it's probably Doris Day, but I'm going to go with the 4th one just because I think that's the cutest answer.
Okay.
His idealized
picture of what his thin and svelte young wife will look like eventually. The correct answer is number 4.
Shocking.
Yay!
Yep. The fairy godmother is
Optimism pays off.
is actually what he hoped his wife would look like in the future, as attested to by their daughter.
Really?
That is a story that she told in a documentary.
Interesting.
Maybe a little chaser action going on there.
Just a little bit, maybe.
I like that. I for the first time maybe ever, my hopeful optimism for what an answer could be has paid off. And I feel vindicated. I feel very.
I hope I hope you have some music to accompany this moment.
I will.
Yes.
The sweeping strings.
Yep.
Well, I think that's our show for the day. So thank you. Hey, did you guys realize that we got through the whole show without talking about COVID-19?
Wow.
Well, I mean, we kind of did.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Good job.
I don't think that's true at all because we started with it.
We started talking about what we were doing in life, like with our days, but we didn't specifically talk about the quarantine. So I'm
way to go, Michael. You bungled that.
No, I counted as a win too. All right.
Let's restate our listener question just in case you missed it or need a refresher. We'd like to ask everyone.
We want to ask everyone out there listening, is there an action you've taken or a conversation you've had with a friend or family member that's had a positive impact on how they relate to your being fat or your attraction to fat people?
Or if you feel like you're already pretty much there and there isn't necessarily room for improvement, what are you doing that feel
works,
like helps with that? Yeah. Like what is your... We're looking for some positivity in this time of much. How did it go last week? It was in this time of
in these difficult times,
these troubling times. Yes, these difficult times.
Sorry, you have to bookend it because it always starts with in these troubling, difficult, different blah 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 times, and then it always ends with now more than ever.
And now more than ever, you should submit these answers to us on our various social media. Go. We're on Instagram and Twitter as @BigFatGayPod. We're on Facebook as the Big Fat Gay Podcast. And you can see all the lovely things we talked about on today's episode on www.bigfatgaypod.com. Yeah, so do that. Send us stuff.
Awesome.
And leave us a 5-star
And-
review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher.
Or
And
Facebook.
also on Facebook if you happen to stop by and check us out. We've got some really good discussions going on there as well.
Yeah, review us. And if you're listening in your car,
Fairy godmother's behind you?
yeah, and she's going to make all your dreams come true.
Bibbidi bobbidi boo.
So watch out.